ladies and gentlemen, my name is Scyushi and we're back in more Trove, and this is a fairly long overdue video wherein I want to talk about all of the hidden ring effects for every class in the game. This is off of Crystal Rings, and tell you guys what the best ones are. Just because I've talked about these extensively in their own dedicated guides for each of the classes and such, but I realized that we never ended up having a full-on video like this that ends up really deep diving into all of the abilities. I'll still try to get through this as quick as possible, but before we do, be sure to leave a like. No, I mean, I would appreciate that, but I wanted to just kind of briefly explain Paragon levels for those of you that might be tuning into this video and have no idea. So Paragon levels is once you get a class to level 30, you'll continually get Paragon levels and continually get XP. Which basically you'll be able to get Paragon levels up to 1,000 before it just resets back to 1. It's irrelevant to the actual class level and doesn't actually give you any strength as it does in every other video game. Instead, it'll end up giving you various resources for crafting class rings. So you'll end up getting a prime loop for a given class by getting a prime level. What is a prime level? Well, it's a prime number from 1 to 1,000, which means that you actually will get less and less prime levels the further you get. So essentially these resources, like I still think this is stupid. I don't know why they have this, because it basically means that as you end up getting further and further along in the game, you're essentially getting less resources, which means that you have less opportunity to polish your ring, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So yeah, anyway, you end up getting these boxes. If you salvage a bunch of these low tier crystal rings, you can get the higher tier boxes, which will guarantee crystal 2, eventually crystal 3, with a very rare chance of getting a gold box. When you craft a crystal 3 box, that is just a guaranteed box that's going to contain crystal 4. Bleh. Okay, and then there's going to end up being the ring polisher. So this is how you'll end up applying either of the two abilities. Sorry, my face cam's kind of blocking it, so let me just move myself out of here for a second. So I could get Unholy Heal or Sneaky Traps. And by doing that, I am going to end up expending one of my resources, a Trovian loop or whatever it is. And again, that's where you end up getting it out, like the prime levels and so on and so forth, because there's a specific resource for it. But anyways, with you guys all caught up on all of that stuff, let's get into it. So I'm just going to be going through this in order that they have it on Trovesaurus. So we're going to be starting with the Bard. So he's got 3 different abilities. Peaceful Moment, which is Peaceful Song buff, reduces damage done to allies. We don't care about defending other players, especially with combat block. Musical Master, the Bard gains a crit damage buff when all 3 Bard songs are in effect. That is pretty much going to end up being the best one. Or you could do Overload, so at max melody, gain a small damage boost. I forget which one of those ends up scaling better. Honestly, it's probably the crit damage buff at this point. But that means that you do have to have all 3 songs. So in this instance, I could say that you could pick one or the other, only depending on maybe you don't want to have to sustain all 3 songs. But I'm pretty confident Musical Master is the one. Any Bard mains can disagree in the comments and let me know if I'm wrong. Then we got the Boomeranger. So he's got a couple options, actually. We've got Blast Bow, which is going to be the best one if you end up using a bow on him, because it's going to end up making a bow attack explode. So it ends up giving you not only an increase of damage, but also just damages enemies around you in the area. So that's really nice. In most cases, though, I would always recommend using a sword for the end game. And the reason why is because with Cyclone, every 3rd attack now pulls enemies in. That is detrimental to the end game because enemies are just going to kind of wander around all over the place, and it can be really annoying. So this will allow you to pull all of those enemies in. Overstuffed Urn, so Urn triggers an additional effect. This, as far as I'd heard from Boomer mains, can be really, really good if you get, like, it's very RNG, but that was what people were using for bosses, just because if you ended up getting like multiple explosions or multiple of the gigantic nuke or multiple of like the big enemy spawners, that would essentially end up being some of the highest damage that you could possibly do in the whole game. So in short, Boomer's crystal ring effects are all good. It's all just situational. But in most cases, I'd say go for Cyclone. Dear God, what? All right, candy bar. Emergency snack spawns a cupcake when taking damage below 50% HP that refills the energy bar and reset ability cooldowns. Who cares? So sweet. Swirl Wind now spawns a gumdrop as well. Spawns on attacking enemies and lasts for 5 seconds. Again, who cares? Spin to win. This is the one that you want on Candy Barb. Reduces the energy cost of Swirl Wind and increases movement speed when used. So it's not that it gives you a boost of movement speed. You essentially will hold the button down, and while you're in the animation, you have more movement speed. This is actually a really efficient way of speed farming with the Candy Barb as well, and it's just a lot of fun. Chloromancer, oh lord. Well, we've got Phyto Barrier. I don't know, I bit my tongue there just because of how atrocious a word that is. So it creates a shield at low health that reduces damage. Who cares? Weird growth. I got a weird growth on my arm, Grandma. After dealing damage, gain a buff that spawns plants randomly nearby for a short time. I don't think that that one's useful, if I recall, because you can only have a limited amount of plants anyways. But maybe that's based on old Chloromancer knowledge. If I'm not mistaken, Gatling is the main one that you want, because basic attacks have a chance to spawn a mini Gatling, and mini Gatlings have a chance of spawning mini Gatlings. Basically, it can spawn a little turret, and that's going to add damage on top of everything else that you're doing. Dino Tamer. Oh my dinos. Dino Buddy now spawns 2 million minions instead of 1. I don't know if you still have the cap of 3, though. But either way, it doesn't really matter because the main one people are going to be going for is Mr. Chomp Chomp, which is the Dino Mount now spawns a T-Rex minion. As far as I know, this thing scales really, really high. Then there is also Deep Wounds, so applies a damage increase debuff to enemies dealt damage by Dino Tamer and Dino Min. Oh my god. So it's a debuff to enemies that increases our damage. That would probably be better for like a group of people, but if you're solo, yeah, Mr. Chomp Chomp. It's as fun to say as it is to use. Then we got the Draco. Draco has Dragon Force, so summon 2 Dragon-Light allies when using your ultimate. This one I know for a fact you still have the limit of 6 minions anyway, so this just kind of helps you get to that 6 minions faster, but it's pretty worthless overall. Firestorm. Spitfire, your right click, has a chance to grant a buff that allows it to be freely used for a short time. That's probably the best one, just because when you get that going, you could just spam right click and that would just be a pretty significant amount of damage. That ability actually does a decent amount of damage. It's just that you never get to use it. And then Dragonborn, so when dodging, the Draco leaves a burnt offering, pretty worthless. That's just a longer animation to put a dragon offering than just mashing your number 1 ability. Then we got Fae Trickster, and yes, I know what you're thinking. Why do I keep reading off all the abilities? Because this is a definitive video that's going to talk about all the abilities. So we've got Dance Partner, so Fairy Dance summons a Fae Juggernaut that taunts enemies. We don't care about taunting enemies, we just need to increase our damage. Mobilize. Fairy Dance summons 1 large enchanted staff that follows the player. If I'm not mistaken, that one is like one of the better ones. But maybe Trick Boom is the best one. So when taking damage, the Fae Trickster has a chance to spawn a glitter bomb at its location. The glitter bomb has increased range and stun. Okay, never mind. Yeah, Mobilize would probably be the best one, because I'm assuming that 1 staff is going to have the damage of all 3 independent staffs. But more importantly, the fact that it can follow you around will help out a lot instead of just being static. But I don't know, honestly, whether or not Trick Boom would end up being better, just because it's random. And it's just, you have to take damage, which means you would have to lose your buff from your passive. So yeah, I'd probably say Mobilize. Then we got the Gunslinger. So Gunslinger has Berserk Slinger. So when using run and gun, gain Berserk, increased damage and attack speed, but greatly reduced movement speed. Well, there you go. That's just the strongest damage right there. Then there's Lock and Load. Dodging gives an instant charge shot. Resets after a short cooldown. Wish it would tell us the actual timing. And Stun Ammo. So charge shot attacks have a chance to stun. Who cares? Yeah, Berserk Slinger is the best one there for sure. So for Ice Age, we got Nice Ice Baby, the Big Chill, which I think is your right click. No? The Big Chill is, oh, number 1. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so it has a chance to spawn an Ice Crash on the player. The Ice Crash will change the ground to ice. I think it does damage, if I'm not mistaken. As cold as ice, so while on ice, Ice Sage gains crit hit chance and crit hit damage, or crit damage. Very situational. Like, the weird thing is, Nice Ice Baby synergizes with Cold as Ice, but you can only have one or the other at the time. So I don't know whether or not the crit damage out of Ice cold or as cold as nice would actually be worthwhile. So I would probably recommend Nice Ice Baby. And then there's of course Chill Out, which Frozen Warden triggers on low health. I mean, that could end up being pretty good too, just because that'll end up triggering your ult, which gives you like extra damage and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think in this case it's Nice Ice Baby. Again, an Ice Sage main can comment if I'm wrong. The Knight. Okay, so we've got Iron Will, increase the damage redirection done by Iron Will, and the Knight gains increased damage reduction. Who cares? We don't need damage reduction. Overcharge. Using Overcharge, or using Charge rather, gives a movement speed increase temporarily. That, in combined with not using his class gem, is actually one of the best ways that you can use the Knight currently, just because your charge without the class gem moves you forward and you can spam it if you have the energy, so it actually is really fast. And then on top of it, it can give you a movement speed boost. So if you end up spamming it quick enough, you could have like a culmination of all of those movement speed boosts at a time and just be like a bullet. Then there's Smashing. Damage dealt by Smash, the ability nobody uses, reduces the cooldown of Iron Will by 1 second. Who cares? Then we got Lunar Lancer. So From the Moon, when in lunar form, basic attacks have a chance to spawn meteors from the sky. I think that might be one of the best ones. He's actually got quite a few really good ones. So Cliffhanger, dodging lowers the cooldown of grapple, and in powered grapple, this ability has a short cooldown. Okay. Need for Speed would probably be my recommendation, just because speed is the name of this class. After using the buffed grapple, gain a speed buff instead of attack. So I think that one's really good. Obviously, it does lower your damage a little bit, but it gives you enough movement speed that it ends up being worthwhile and a ton of fun. Neo Ninja, Clone Jutsu. The clone created by Shadow Flip explodes at the end of its duration. That's probably good. Float like a butterfly, gain slow fall for the duration of final technique. So Clone Jutsu for damage, float like a butterfly for speed farming. Because when you end up getting that slow fall with your final technique, you basically will use your ult and then you just constantly backflip while you're in midair. And so long as you don't jump, like the way that energy regen works in this game is you basically end up losing or not regenerating energy as soon as you've jumped. And then there's a slight cooldown before you start slowly regenerating your energy. But the funny thing is it doesn't actually factor in whether or not you're in the air. So having slow fall, so long as you haven't jumped for a certain amount of time, you can backflip and essentially glide through the air at Mach speeds as the Neon Ninja, not getting caught on the terrain and other crap because you're facing the other way, facing backwards. And essentially you'll still end up regenerating your energy. So then there's Recharge, gain energy when dodging. Yeah, who cares? Pirate Captain, all hands on deck. Using Man of War now summons a Parrot Cannoneer as well. Okay, Avast Ye, basic attacks cause minions to attack the player's target, as well as applying a debuff, increasing damage done to it. I think that's the reason why you use that, is because it'll end up increasing our damage to the enemies. Then there's Raiders, so First Mate has a chance to spawn doubloons when it hits enemies. Yeah, Avast Ye, I would say, is probably the biggest one. Revenant, we've got Speed Spears, which Spirit Spears no longer slows the Revenant. Probably the best option for him, just because then you can leave your spears on and wander around fighting things instead of enemies wandering away from you slowly. Spirit Squad, Spirit Storm, your ult summons a group of tiny spirit race. That would probably be the damage option, I would assume, because you can usually end up getting away with your ult every dungeon, so long as you can compensate with flasks. And then there's Vengeful Storm, so when at low health, Spirit Storm is triggered automatically, and it has a long cooldown. Yeah, I think in this case, probably Speed Spears if you're speed farming, just because that is going to help, but you're not going to be speed farming on the Revenant, let's be real. It's most of all quality of life of being able to move. And then otherwise, Spirit Squad is probably the more damage. Your boy Shadow Hunter. So we've got Sneaky Traps. When dodging, the Shadow Hunter drops a stun snare. That could actually be better than a lot of people think, myself included, because if I'm being perfectly honest, the Sun Snare can deal a pretty significant amount of damage, depending on where you are in the game. And it also doubles as stunning enemies. So the main issue that would come with that, and comes with using the snare on Shadow Hunter, is because enemies at the end game are just so spongy. And a lot of times the biggest issue is when you get to enemies that are at Cursed Skulls, because they spawn all separated from each other and just kind of slowly wander around because there's no AI in this game. And so snaring them can be useful if they're all bunched up. And then that could end up being pretty useful. But in most cases, you would just use Tactical Seekers. So it makes it so that when enemies take damage from the Shadow Hunter's Sacred Arrow, your ult, a Shadow Seeker will fire from the Shadow Hunter and attack the closest target. It's just more damage, essentially. Then there's Unholy Heal. So when enemies with Shadow Mark are defeated, the Shadow Hunter is healed a small amount. We have Flash and Combat Block for that. No thanks. Solarion has Guiding Flight. So Prismatic Blast and Guiding Light now also apply the Solar Wing Slowfall effect. It basically gives Slowfall. Who cares? Solar Stance. This will remove the Solar Wings effect, now applying a damage reduction buff for a short time. We don't care about survivability. Prismatic Chain. Prismatic Chain throws this class over the top, dude. Like, I'm not kidding. This class is essentially a really powerful, if not the strongest single target class in the game. I would argue even over Boomer, because Boomer can deal more damage, but it's very luck-based. Solarion is pretty consistent, especially if you can apply all of your, damage over time crap. Where this class really suffers, though, is fighting large groups of enemies, and as we've already talked about Cursed Skulls at the end game, it can become a problem. Prismatic Chain takes care of that. So this makes Prismatic Blast causes enemies damaged by it to also fire off a Prismatic Blast, damaging nearby enemies. The problem is Solarion is very broken at the moment. A lot of his attacks barely work. And that skill, I honestly didn't know was supposed to just guaranteed chain through enemies, because it doesn't. It doesn't often chain through enemies. When it does, I know it's a bug because it's inconsistent. And when it does work, it kills everything, just instantly everything's dead because the Solarion just deals such heaps of damage. Tomb Raiser, Banshee Blast. Basic attacks have a chance of summoning a baby Banshee. Cool, probably extra damage there. Ghost More reduces the energy drain from Ghost form. That would give you more invulnerability for a longer time. But Skell-Biggle Split, that's going to be the big one. So using Bone Tirage has a chance to summon a larger Skell-Little, and when this large Skell-Little dies, it will spawn Skell-Littles. Skell-Biggles just breaks up into Skull-Littles. Oh my god, the words used here. But yeah, that one's the best. If I'm not mistaken, you can actually get 3 Skell-Biggles. I might be mistaken in that. Maybe you can only get 1. But the point is you want to at least have one of those on top of your little babies. And these guys end up hitting like a truck. And last but not least, we have the Vanguardian. So we've got Champions Congregate. Fired Up and Force Flash now apply up to 2 nearby enemies when used. Who cares? Combo. Plasma Blast now applies the same damage increase that your I-Beam applies. Who cares? Hero Stand. Laser Leap and Hero's Charge grant a buff that heals while dealing damage for a short time. Wow. I don't think there's a single one of these that I could recommend, honestly speaking. Anyways, like I said, folks, this was a long time coming. And don't worry, I've got a lot of very common questions that I've been getting in the comments and stuff like that. You guys have been asking on my live streams, where'd you get those wings? What's the best mount in the game? That kind of stuff. I have all of those videos scheduled to go over the following weeks while I am away on my trip to Japan. And I'll have a video that will talk about when I'm actually on my trip to Japan, just so you guys are all clear on everything that's going on. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to catch the test server before I'm away. So that kind of sucks.